for joining Envirochat, PerkinElmer's ongoing series of one-on-one conversations with leaders in environmental analysis. Episode 3. Microplastics are on the menu. The impact microplastics have within the food chain is undeniable. This hard fact poses many questions. To answer some of these questions, we asked Dr. Jose Hanero, professor of biochemistry at De La Salle University in Manila. His research is focused on environmental and sustainable chemistry, particularly on microplastics in marine commodities. Dr. Hanero is also a recognized leader on youth environmental programs, including being a recipient of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Environment Ministers 2019 Youth Eco Champion Award. And now, here is our host from PerkinElmer, John Martin.
We are joined today by Dr. Jose Hanero, professor of biochemistry at De La Salle University in the Philippines. His research is focused on environmental and sustainable chemistry, including the topic of microplastics in the environment, and specifically in marine commodities. He's one of the lead authors of the youth-oriented version of the Global Environmental Outlook 6 for the Asia-Pacific region, published by the United Nations Environment Program. In recognition of his contribution to the environment, he was one of the recipients of the 2019 ASEAN Youth Eco Champion Awards given by the ASEAN Environment Ministers. Welcome, Dr. Hanero. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, John.
Before we discuss the issue of microplastics and nanoplastic pollution, I was hoping to find out a little bit more about you. How did you become interested in tackling this problem of plastics pollution? Was there a particular instance or point in time when this issue really captured your attention?
I first heard about microplastics when I was browsing literature. I was trying to catch up on some of the latest studies related to chemistry, and the term microplastic caught my attention. Coming from a biomaterials background, I was intrigued with the term, and I did not know that it was a pollutant. So after reading more about this, about microplastics, my interest for it grew even more because it's a pollutant commonly found in marine commodities. And since the Philippines is an archipelagic country, we have a rich and abundant marine resource. So I wanted to know if microplastic pollution occurs in the Philippines. So that's when my research on microplastic got started.
I think many of our viewers, many of the people watching this have maybe heard about microplastics or plastics pollution, and they've seen pictures of plastics in the ocean. But maybe this idea of the microplastics being in the marine commodities is new to them, and they might be interested in knowing a little bit more about that. Can you tell us a little bit about how these bits of microplastics end up in those marine commodities?
Mm-hmm. Microplastics, these are plastic fragments less than 5 millimeters in size, and they usually can come from the fragmentation from a large plastic source. So improperly disposed plastic products, because of weathering, because of exposure to harsh environmental conditions, can be broken down into smaller fragments. And also the lint from our clothes, every time we wash our clothes, so the lint goes to the sewage, and that to bodies of water. And also a major contributor of microplastics in the environment can come from tires and road wear particles. And also microplastic additives in different consumer products, such as cosmetics, can also be discharged in bodies of water. Thus, seemingly harmless everyday activities that we perform can actually contribute to the microplastic pollution.
And what effect do these have on the fish themselves that ingest these microplastics? And then do they have an effect on the people who eat the fish that have the microplastics in them?
Yes, I guess that's one of the major concerns that we have regarding microplastics in the environment. So several studies have already reported adverse effects of microplastic ingestion and exposure to marine organisms such as fish, bivalves, and algae, as well as in animal models such as mice. So these are laboratory studies. So these observed adverse effects may include stunted growth, negative impacts on reproduction. It was also observed to trigger the inflammatory response, inflammatory biochemical responses, as well as the alteration in the gut microbiota or the microbial population in the gut of the mouse, among others. However, a consensus has yet to be reached regarding the actual and long-term impact of microplastic exposure to organisms. A particular concern was that in these laboratory studies, the concentration at which these adverse effects were observed was very high, several orders of magnitude higher compared to the actual microplastic concentration that is observed in the environment. Thus, performing experiments that reflect the environmental conditions much better will be needed in order to conclusively ascertain the impacts of microplastic exposure to organisms and to the people that ingest these animals.
Have there been studies that have attempted to quantify how widespread this problem is? Do we have an idea of how big of a challenge this issue might be?
There are a lot of studies that perform monitoring, or they try to detect the presence of microplastics. And if we look at the body of literature, the body of information that is available, we can really see that the problem is widespread. So for example, researchers have detected the presence of microplastics in remote areas that are not inhabited by humans. So for example, the Arctic region. So they were able to detect the presence of microplastics in that place. And also, they were able to detect the presence of microplastics from rainwater. Okay, so it just gives you an idea on how widespread the problem is. So it appears that microplastics are ubiquitous in nature.
There may be a concern for viewers about consuming potentially contaminated or polluted marine commodities. Can we test this food to see if it has microplastics in it before we consume it?
Well, I think that would be a very tedious process, since microplastics tend to be inside the organism, and yeah, the microplastics are very small. Now considering that conclusive evidence regarding the actual adverse and long-term effects of microplastic ingestion is not yet available, removing or testing food items for microplastics may be impractical at this point. So it might lead to higher food prices, and the risk or the benefit of doing this is not even clear yet.
Are there any regulations in place or regulations that are being considered that may help stem the flow of microplastics?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the US, I read that you have the Microbead Free Waters Act, which prohibits the manufacturing, packaging, and distribution of rinse-off cosmetics that contain microplastics. A similar legislation is pending here in the Philippines. It's House Bill 8120, which I hope will be enacted soon. In Europe, restriction on using microplastics for a wider range of products, not only cosmetics, is being lobbied. But beyond restrictions, policies that address plastic waste management will also have an impact on microplastic management. So we should be aware that there is more to microplastic management than just imposing restrictions. Of course, these restrictions are important, but they are insufficient by themselves to address the different facets of the problem.
You mentioned that there may be some management actions that could be taken. that could help manage this challenge a little bit better. Could you expand on that a little bit? What could be done to actually cut down on the amount of microplastics that are in the environment?
But I think our problem on microplastic is tied is is tied with our problem with plastic, which I think it's a very significant environmental challenge that we are facing. So I think our plastic problem requires synergistic responses from all sectors of society. So governments cannot take a passive approach. Businesses cannot sweep this problem under the rug as long as they are earning. And individuals cannot pass the blame to others or behave as if our actions do not have impact. So we all need to do something about this problem.
What types of research are you currently involved in with regard to microplastics, and what would you hope to undertake in the future? What additional studies and what type of long-term outcome would you hope that your studies could have?
Well, right now, I intend to continue our monitoring studies because I believe what gets measured gets managed. So the data and information that we produce may be of value to policymakers that may assist them in crafting meaningful and impactful policies that can address plastic pollution. So in the future, I'd also like to embark on studies that will help clarify the the mechanistic aspect on the effects of microplastic ingestion to different animal models.
One other thing before we let you go, you had mentioned that you feel like the solution to this problem is all of us kind of working together, not just industry, not just government, but kind of a synergistic approach across various groups of people. What can we as individuals, what can I do as an individual to try to help with this problem, to try to cut down on microplastics?
I think we should adopt a conscious mindset that every bit counts. Sometimes we feel that a small action is just a drop in a bucket, but every bit counts. Our collective action can lead to something impactful. So we should also be making informed decisions on the products that we purchase and try to hold companies that are major contributors to plastic pollution accountable through our collective purchasing power. So it's time that we properly select the items that we purchase. And also let us start placing the environment in the equation and make it a critical component of our decision-making process.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dr. Hanero, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. It's been wonderful speaking with you and gaining some more insights into microplastics as well as microplastics, specifically in marine commodities. To learn a little bit more about Dr. Hanero and his work, please visit De La Salle University and their website, www.dlsu.edu.ph. And thank you for joining us as well. We look forward to seeing you again on another edition of Envirochat.
Thank you.